Have you ever wondered where the final line is drawn for trust within a family? I'm not talking about the trust in small promises or that they'll keep an unimportant secret. I'm talking about absolute trust. That fundamental belief that your own flesh and blood would never, under any circumstances, intentionally sabotage your future for their own gain. I used to believe in that. My daughter, Chloe, did too. Chloe was the pride and light of my life. At 18, she possessed a sharp intelligence and a boundlessly kind heart. She had worked relentlessly, giving up parties and summer fun to build a single dream, becoming a doctor. That dream was secured by an $85,000 trust fund, the entire sacred inheritance my late mother had left for her granddaughter, her one ticket to the gates of a prestigious university. And then, one March evening, the fateful phone call came. On the other end of the line was Chloe's paternal grandmother, my former mother-in-law, Helen. Her voice was trembling, broken by choked sobs. The image of Grandpa Walter appeared on the video call, thin, pale, and looking terribly frail. They told us two words that made my daughter's world collapse: pancreatic cancer. Terminal. They spoke of a groundbreaking clinic in Mexico, a last glimmer of hope not covered by insurance. They begged, pleaded with Chloe to use her ticket to the future to save her grandfather's life. They trampled on her sense of duty, using her love against her. And Chloe, with a shattered heart, did what any kind-hearted grandchild would do. She transferred the entire $85,000, her entire future. It was a noble sacrifice, but it wasn't the truth. 3 weeks later, the truth was exposed. Not through a confession, not from a phone call, but from a glossy real estate blog in Seattle, featuring a photo of her cousin Haley, beaming beside her grandparents on the balcony of a luxury Bayview apartment. The headline read, "An early graduation present, Gen Z invests in real estate." And in the article was a quote from Grandpa Walter himself, our dying man. "We've always believed in investing in a solid future. This was a gift we had long planned to celebrate her getting into college." The rage inside me didn't burn into ash. It was compressed, tempered, and forged into a spear of cold steel. They didn't just take money. They stole my mother's legacy. They stole my daughter's dream. They weaponized her love. They thought we would cry, accept it, and break down. They were wrong. If you have ever felt betrayed to your very core, if you believe that justice isn't always found in silence, but sometimes must be reclaimed with intelligence, strategy, and courage, then this video is for you. Stay with me. I'm going to tell you the whole story, every lie, every piece of evidence we gathered, every fiery confrontation, and every vicious psychological blow. This is not a story for you to pity us. This is a detailed blueprint on how to take back what is yours. The journey to reclaim $85,000 and my daughter's honor begins now. To truly understand the depth of this betrayal, I have to take you back a bit, to the small world my daughter and I built together in the heart of the vast city of Seattle. We didn't live in the glamorous neighborhoods you see on postcards. Our world was a small 2-bedroom apartment in Renton, a place that always smelled faintly of roasted coffee in the morning and old books in the evening. My life was a series of long night shifts at the hospital, a faded blue nurse's uniform that was worn at the shoulders, and a constant effort to ensure Chloe had everything she needed, though maybe not everything she wanted. Our love wasn't measured in expensive gifts, but in late-night dinners together, in the times I helped her study after a 12-hour shift, and in the way she always left a warm cup of tea for me on the table. It was a simple, humble life, but it was ours, and it was filled with sincerity. That world was the complete opposite of the one on her father's side of the family. My former sister-in-law, Brenda, was married to David, a senior executive in the tech industry. They lived in a magnificent mansion in Bellevue overlooking Lake Washington, with shiny luxury cars in the garage and 5-star vacations frequently updated on social media. And the center of that world was none other than Haley, their only daughter. Every Thanksgiving or Christmas, when our two worlds collided at Walter and Helen's house, the difference became painfully clear. The grandparents would spend hours listening to Haley talk endlessly about her ski trip to Whistler or her plans for a summer study abroad in Spain. They would marvel at her every achievement, no matter how small. And then Walter would turn to Chloe, the granddaughter, who had won first place in the statewide science fair, and ask an indifferent question. "School's still going okay?" Chloe, with her grace and innate kindness, would never show she was hurt. She would always smile, answer patiently, and ask about them politely. But I, with a mother's heart, could see the flicker of pain in her eyes. She wasn't jealous of the material gifts, but she craved recognition, craved to be seen, to be heard, the way they did with Haley. That very lack of affection made Chloe even more determined. She didn't count on anyone else. She knew her future was in her own hands. Her desk was always piled high with stacks of medical textbooks. She could rattle off complex surgical procedures with a fiery passion. She spent 3 nights a week volunteering in the emergency room at St. Francis Hospital, not for the college application credit, but because she genuinely wanted to be there, to help, to learn. And that brings us to the heart of the matter, the $85,000 fund. That money wasn't something Chloe or I had saved. It was a legacy, a trust fund carefully established by my mother, Chloe's grandmother, before she passed away from heart disease. I still remember her words to me in her final days, her voice weak but firm. "Sarah, I don't have much to leave behind, but I want to give Chloe something no one can ever take away. An education. Use this money so she can get into the best school, so she can fly high without worrying about financial burdens." To Chloe, that money was more than just dollars and cents. It was her grandmother's final promise. It was a sacred responsibility. She refused to use even a single dollar for personal things. "This is Grandma's money, Mom," she once told me. "I'm only going to use it for one purpose, to become a doctor, so she can be proud of me." And that was Chloe. A young woman with a huge dream, a kind heart, and an absolute loyalty to the final wish of the deceased. She believed in goodness, she believed in family, and she believed that hard work would be rewarded. She placed her absolute trust in the people she called her grandparents, a trust that was about to be exploited, crushed, and callously discarded to serve their own selfishness and blind favoritism. Our peaceful, hopeful world was about to be drowned by the cruelest lie I have ever known. That fateful night began like any other. I had just come home from a long shift, tired but happy to see the light in the living room still on. Chloe was at the dining table, surrounded by thick biology and anatomy books. She was preparing for an important exam, her face focused and her eyes shining with a pure passion. I smiled, quietly went to the kitchen to make her a cup of chamomile tea to help her relax. Just then, Chloe's phone, lying on the table, buzzed, breaking the silence. She glanced at the screen. "It's Grandma Helen," she said, her voice a little surprised since her grandparents rarely called this late. She answered cheerfully, putting it on speakerphone as was our habit. "Hi, Grandma." The voice on the other end was not the usual cheerful one. Instead, it was a broken, intermittent sob. "Chloe? Oh, Chloe." My heart clenched. I stopped what I was doing, standing still in the kitchen to listen. Chloe immediately sat up straight, worry etched on her face. "Grandma? What's wrong? Is Grandpa okay?" A few seconds of silence stretched on, filled only by Helen's labored breathing. Then Walter's voice came through, weak and unusually tired. "I'm here, sweetheart." "Grandpa, are you not feeling well?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. I didn't want to worry you," Walter replied, his voice hoarse. "But the doctors, they just got the test results. It's pancreatic cancer, Chloe, terminal." The teacup nearly slipped from my hand. Cancer. The word was a stone thrown into the calm pond of our home. I looked at my daughter. Her shoulders slumped, her hands gripped the edge of the table, her face turned pale. "No, that's not possible," she whispered. "Did the doctors make a mistake? We can find another specialist." "They said we don't have much time," Walter interrupted, a dry cough echoing through the phone. "My insurance won't cover the newest treatments. But there's a glimmer of hope. A private clinic in Tijuana, Mexico. They specialize in an advanced cellular immunotherapy. It's not FDA approved, which is why insurance refused. But their success rates, they're incredible." I stepped out of the kitchen, alarm bells starting to ring in my head. Mexico? Full payment up front? It sounded like a scam I'd heard my patients talk about. I tried to signal to Chloe, shaking my head subtly, but she was completely consumed by panic and the fear of losing her grandfather. "So, "So what do we need to do?" Chloe asked, her voice full of desperate hope. "How much does it cost?" It was Helen again, her voice now filled with a feigned urgency. "It's very expensive, sweetie. They require the full payment in cash before they'll proceed, about $90,000. $90,000. The number hung in the air. I looked directly into Chloe's eyes. She understood my gaze. But then Helen delivered the final, most vicious and cruel manipulative blow. "Your mother, Chloe's grandmother." Her voice choked perfectly. "She was a wonderful woman. She would want you to do this, Chloe. She would want you to use her gift to save your grandfather's life, to keep our family from being torn apart. You know she would, don't you?" Her words were like poison-tipped needles dipped in honey, aimed straight at my daughter's kind heart and sense of duty. They were weaponizing her love for her deceased grandmother. Chloe didn't answer right away. She looked at me, her eyes a chaotic mix of fear, pain, confusion, and a heavy sense of responsibility. She knew I was suspicious. But the image of her frail grandfather and the desperate pleas of her grandmother, combined with dragging her other grandmother's memory into it, created a psychological vice that squeezed her tight. "Your trust fund," Helen whispered through the phone, as if reading our minds. "It's our only hope, Chloe." The call ended not long after. No promises were made, but the silence in our small kitchen was heavier than 1,000 words. Chloe sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the wall in front of her. She didn't cry. She looked worse than that. She looked as though her soul had been pulled from her body. And I stood there, a cold feeling of suspicion and anger beginning to smolder inside me. I didn't believe them. But looking at the pain on my daughter's face, I knew the real battle had only just begun. A battle not just against a disease, but against the very people we were supposed to trust the most. A heavy silence engulfed our small kitchen after the call ended. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to grow louder, counting each passing second of confusion. In that moment, I wanted to grab my daughter, shake her by the shoulders, and scream, "Don't believe them! Can't you see? This is all so absurd!" And I tried. I used every rational argument of a nurse, of a mother. "Chloe, listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Pancreatic cancer is a terrible disease, but no one treats it by flying to a no-name clinic in Mexico and paying for everything in cash. It doesn't work like that. There are treatment protocols, reputable clinical trials right here at the Fred Hutch Cancer Center." I continued, raising the questions they had skillfully avoided. Why didn't they talk to Aunt Brenda and Uncle David? David is financially capable of handling this without needing a cent of your money. Why you? Why target Grandma's trust fund? Chloe sat still, her eyes looking down at her hands, which were clasped tightly together on the table. She didn't argue, she just listened. And when I finished, she looked up, her eyes watery but not crying. "But what if?" Her voice was as soft as a whisper. "What if there's even a 1% chance it's real, Mom? What if he's really in pain, and this is his last hope? I couldn't live with myself thinking that I let him die because I was too suspicious, because I wanted to keep the money for myself." And then she said the words that silenced all my reasoning. "This is Grandma's money, and I believe she would want me to save her husband's life more than keep it for my education. A life is more important, isn't it, Mom?" How could I argue with that? How could I tell her that her kindness was being exploited, that her nobility was being turned into a tool? That night, a silent civil war was waged in our home. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, trying to devise a plan, some way to intervene. I could hear her tossing and turning in the next room, the occasional soft sniffle. She was fighting too, a battle between her young reason and a heart that was far too kind. The next morning when I walked into the kitchen, Chloe was already sitting there. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were dark-rimmed, but her gaze was strangely clear. A terrifying peace had settled over her. "I've made my decision, Mom," she said, her voice without a hint of hesitation. "I'm going to help them." That day, I drove my daughter to the bank in a silence as heavy as lead. With every foot we traveled, I hoped she would change her mind. But she didn't. We walked into the bank branch, its cool, formal atmosphere a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I stood by and watched as my daughter, the child I had raised and protected, now sat before a bank teller, filling out the forms that would redefine her future. I saw her hand tremble slightly as she wrote down the number 85,000. Each digit was written carefully, as if she were engraving her name onto a judgment. "This is a very large sum, ma'am," the teller said, glancing at Chloe with a bit of concern. "Are you sure about this transaction?" Chloe just nodded, a firm, resolute nod. "I'm sure." Holding the cashier's check in her hand, she looked both relieved, as if a burden had been lifted, and empty, as if she had lost a part of her soul. That afternoon, we drove to her grandparents' lavish house. Helen answered the door, her face carefully made up to hide her joy, but she couldn't conceal the triumphant glint in her eyes. She threw her arms around Chloe, crocodile tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, my angel, you've saved this family." Walter walked out of his study, his gait showing no signs of a man in the final stages of a terminal illness. He put on a show of coughing and gave Chloe a weak hug. "I owe you my life, sweetheart. We'll pay you back as soon as we can." As they took the check from my daughter's hand, a cold, nauseating feeling ran down my spine. I didn't see gratitude in their eyes. I saw only satisfied greed. A mother's intuition screamed at me that something was terribly wrong. On the way home, Chloe leaned her head against the window and cried. This time, she truly cried. They weren't tears of fear or confusion anymore. They were tears of sacrifice. She thought she had just done the right thing, a noble thing. And I could only grip the steering wheel, my heart aching, because deep down, I knew my daughter hadn't just saved a life. She had just single-handedly destroyed her own dream based on a perfectly orchestrated lie. The weeks that followed passed in a strange state of limbo. Our life tried to return to a normal rhythm, but it was a damaged normality. An invisible shadow hung over our house. Chloe, with incredible resilience, didn't let herself drown in sorrow. She wiped her tears and set about rebuilding her dream from the fragments. She spent hours in the library, researching the top community colleges in the state, looking for new, much smaller scholarships. "It's just a detour, Mom, not a dead end," she'd tell me, forcing a brave smile. Seeing her optimism made my heart both proud and pained. Meanwhile, I lived in a state of constant anxiety. Every week, I would call Helen to ask about Walter's condition. The answers were always vague and mechanically repeated. "Oh, things are progressing well, dear." "He's resting. The doctors say he needs to recuperate." When I asked for a specific surgery date or the name of the clinic in Mexico, she would skillfully change the subject. Their evasion only made the alarm bells in my head ring louder. And then, one Tuesday evening, about 3 weeks after Chloe had transferred the money, the truth found me. I was sitting on the sofa after a long day at work, tiredly scrolling through my tablet, trying to give my mind a rest. I followed a few lifestyle and real estate bloggers in Seattle just to look at pretty pictures of the city. And then, a post caught my eye. Its title was, "Seattle's Next Generation, Young People Investing in Apartments with $1,000,000 Views." I scrolled through photos of successful young people, smiling on the balconies of their brand new apartments. Just something to kill time, I thought. But then, my heart stopped. Among the unfamiliar faces was a very familiar one, my niece, Haley. She was standing on the balcony of a stunning penthouse apartment with a panoramic view of Elliott Bay glittering under the sunset. It must be a coincidence, I told myself. Maybe she was just at a friend's party. But then I read the caption below the picture. It read, "Haley, 18, a future UCLA student, is one of the youngest owners of an apartment in this luxury tower. It's an early graduation present from my grandparents," Haley shared. "They've always encouraged me to invest in sustainable values." The room started to spin. The air was sucked out of my lungs. I clicked on the article, reading every word, hoping I had misunderstood. But I hadn't. The article went on to interview Haley's grandparents about their generous decision. And then I read it. A direct quote from Walter, the man who was supposed to be fighting terminal cancer in Mexico. His voice in the article, through the cold, printed words, was full of smugness and health. "We've always believed in investing in a solid future for our grandchildren. Instead of a frivolous trip to Europe, we decided to give Haley a real asset for a strong start in life. This was a gift we had long planned to celebrate her getting into college." Long planned. Each word stabbed my mind like shards of broken glass. The lie wasn't just about the cancer. The lie was everything. The disease, the clinic in Mexico, the urgency, the promise to pay it back. It was all a play, an elaborately staged drama to execute a plan they had hatched long ago. They needed money for Haley's gift, and they found their source. Chloe's inheritance, her dream, my mother's dying wish. A pure, ice-cold rage I had never felt in my life surged through my veins. It wasn't hot, it was freezing. It was the fury of a cornered animal, realizing its child's food had just been stolen by members of its own pack. They hadn't just taken the money, they had stolen her innocence. They had trampled on her kindness. They had turned her love into a weapon against her. I set the tablet down on the table. My hands were no longer shaking. My mind became terrifyingly clear. They had made a fatal mistake. They thought Chloe and I would be weak, that we would accept our fate. They didn't know they had just awakened a mother. And I was going to make them pay for every single one of my daughter's tears. I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream. I sat in the silence of the living room, letting the rage wash away every soft emotion. The grief was gone, replaced by a single crystal-clear objective. Before I told Chloe, I needed to hear them admit it with their own mouths. I needed to confirm this cruelty, not through an article, but from the voice of the mastermind himself. I picked up my phone. My hand was steady. I scrolled through my contacts and pressed Walter. The phone rang 3 times before he answered, his voice somewhat annoyed. "What is it, Sarah?" "I'm busy." "I won't take up much of your time," I replied, my voice as cold as ice. "I'm just calling to congratulate you on Haley's new real estate investment in Bellevue. The view of the bay is stunning." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I could picture his face, the smugness quickly turning to panic. I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, really?" I said sarcastically. "Well, perhaps you should read the Seattle Lifestyle blog. They have a lovely quote from you, especially the part where you said it was a gift that was long planned. The key word here is long planned, Walter. Much longer than your pancreatic cancer diagnosis, I imagine." "You're talking nonsense," he snapped, his voice having lost all its composure. "Nonsense? Then tell me about the surgery. Did it go well? Was the service at the Mexican clinic good? Or was it a miraculous recovery the moment my daughter's $85,000 landed in your account?" This time, he didn't deny it. When cornered, a person's true nature is revealed. Walter's voice shifted from panic to a condescending, chilling coldness. "Listen, Sarah, Chloe needs to learn a lesson about the real world. You don't always get what you want, especially not some expensive, far-fetched university." I could barely breathe in the face of his shamelessness. "A lesson? You call deceiving and manipulating a child a lesson? It will be good for her character," he continued, without a shred of remorse. "Community college is good enough. She's too much like you, Sarah. Always had unrealistic ambitions, just like your mother. The attack on my deceased mother was the final straw." "Don't you dare mention my mother," I hissed through gritted teeth. "I'm just speaking the truth," he replied nonchalantly. "We acted in the greater good of the family. This conversation is over." I hung up, not because I had nothing left to say, but because I had gotten what I needed, confirmation. His cruelty wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate choice. And now, for the hardest part. I sat in the dark, waiting for Chloe to come home from her part-time job at the library. With every passing minute, the weight of the truth I was about to reveal pressed down on my chest. How do you tell your daughter that her own grandparents conspired to destroy her future? When Chloe walked in, tired but still smiling, my heart broke. "Mom, I'm home." "Chloe, sit down," I said, my voice as gentle as I could manage. "I need to tell you something." Worry immediately clouded her face. "What is it, Mom? Is it news about Grandpa?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, sweetie, it is about Grandpa, and about his surgery." "How is he? Were there complications?" "What?" I looked straight into her eyes that were still so clear and full of trust. "There was no surgery, sweetie." Chloe's face went blank, a look of complete confusion. "What are you talking about? I don't understand." And then I told her everything about the blog, about Haley's apartment, about the phone call with Walter, about their long-hatched plan. As I spoke, I watched the stages of painful truth play out across my daughter's face. First came denial. "That's impossible. There must be some mistake. Maybe they needed the money for something else more urgent. Then, when I showed her the article on the tablet, denial turned into silent horror. The color drained from her face, white as a sheet. She didn't cry. She just sat there, hugging herself as if trying to hold her body together from shattering into pieces. Finally, after a few terrifying minutes of silence, she looked up, a flicker of determination in her tear-filled eyes. I want to hear them say it. She reached for her phone, her trembling hand dialing her grandfather's number and putting it on speaker. When he answered, Chloe asked a single question, her voice clear but shattered. "Grandpa, the surgery? Was it real?" A long silence stretched on the other end, a silence that was the answer itself. Finally, Walter's voice came on, cold and impatient. "Chloe, sometimes adults have to make complicated decisions for the greater good." Chloe didn't let him finish. She quietly ended the call, placing the phone on the table with a terrifying precision. Then she stood up and walked to her bedroom without another word. I knew in that moment that a part of my daughter had died forever. Her trust, her innocence, and the image of a loving family had all been incinerated by the flame of a cruel truth. I didn't go into her room that night. I just sat in the old armchair in the living room, the room shrouded in darkness, and listened. The initial silence was more terrifying than crying. It was the silence of shock, of a world that had just shattered. And then I heard it. A sob, muffled by a pillow, trying not to be heard. It wasn't the cry of a child disappointed about not getting a toy. It was the cry of someone betrayed to their very core. The cry of a soul that had just realized the love it cherished was just a prop in a deceitful play. Every one of her sobs was like a knife twisting in my heart. I felt a terrible helplessness. I could protect my child from physical wounds, from life's difficulties, but how could I protect her from the cruelty of the very people she loved? That night, I wasn't just a mother. I was a helpless guard outside a collapsing fortress. The dawn broke, casting faint streaks of light into the room. I hadn't slept for a second. When I heard Chloe's door creak open, I held my breath. She walked out, and for a moment, my heart stopped. Her eyes were swollen and red, but inside them, there was no longer the confusion and brokenness of the night before. The cold emptiness had been replaced by a spark, a cold, determined spark I had never seen in my child before. She sat down across from me, silent for a long moment, then spoke, her voice hoarse but clear. "They didn't just take my money, Mom." I waited. "They took my image of Grandma from my mind," she continued, looking straight into my eyes. "Grandma left that money with all her love, as a promise for the future. And they turned it into a tool for their greed. They turned my love for Grandpa, my respect for Grandma, into a weakness to attack." She took a deep breath, and when she said the next sentence, I knew my little girl had truly grown up overnight. I'm not going to let them get away with it. Not just because of the money, but for Grandma's honor, and for my own. I won't let them think they can trample on people like that and get away with it. A strange sense of pride and relief washed over me. The fire in her eyes ignited the fire in my heart. We were no longer victims. We were survivors, and we were about to become warriors. "I think so too," I replied, placing my hand on hers. "I've been thinking about this all night. We're not going to call and scream. We're not going to argue. We're not going to beg for their pity. We are going to act smartly, and we are going to act decisively." I stood up, went to my desk, and pulled out a notebook I had scribbled in during the night. "First step," I said, "we need a lawyer, not a normal family lawyer. We need the best in the field of financial fraud and complex family disputes, someone who isn't afraid to confront wealthy, respectable-looking people." "And there's more," I continued, flipping to another page. "I heard about someone, a former business partner of Walter's. I heard Walter also cheated him in a business deal years ago, and he suffered heavy losses. He might not want to get involved in our family matters, but he might want the chance to see justice served." Chloe listened intently, her eyes no longer holding any fear. Instead, they shone with the focus of someone preparing for battle. The pain was still there, etched deep in her swollen eyes, but it was now encased in a layer of steel armor. "So what's the plan, Mom?" she asked. I looked at my daughter, seeing a reflection of myself and my late mother in her, an unbreakable resilience. The plan is we're going to get it all back, Chloe, I said, my voice full of power. Every single cent, with interest, and for emotional distress. They started this war when they thought we were weak, but we will be the ones to end it. In our small kitchen that morning, my daughter and I made a silent pact. The tears had dried, the pain had been turned into strength. Our calculated journey for justice had officially begun. 2 days later, we were sitting in the office of a woman named Grace Tanaka. Her office wasn't like the old book-filled law offices I had imagined. It was in a modern glass building in downtown Seattle, minimalist, sharp, and efficient, just like its owner. Grace was in her 40s, with intelligent, sharp eyes and an attitude that showed she didn't waste a single word. She had been recommended as the best shark in the field of complex financial disputes. We sat across from her, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a real glimmer of hope. Chloe, sitting beside me, began to tell the story. She spoke calmly and clearly, without a single tear. She presented the events chronologically, from the phone call about the fake cancer, the bank transfer, to the real estate blog post. When she finished, she placed the bank statements and a printout of the blog on the table. Grace listened, not interrupting once. Her eyes never left Chloe, occasionally nodding decisively. When Chloe was done, Grace was silent for about a minute, reviewing the documents. Then she looked up, directly at us. "This is a classic case of fraudulent misrepresentation," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, but full of authority. "They exploited trust and a family relationship to commit fraud. The fact that they fabricated a medical emergency to apply psychological pressure is an aggravating factor. Simply put, what they did is not just morally wrong, it is illegal." Hearing those words from a legal expert felt like an invisible weight had been lifted from our shoulders. We weren't crazy. We weren't overreacting. We were the victims of a crime. "So what can we do?" I asked. Grace smiled for the first time, a sharp smile. "We can do a lot of things, Miss Sarah. First step, I will draft a formal demand letter, reclaiming the full $85,000 plus statutory interest and all attorney's fees. The letter will state clearly that if they do not comply within 10 days, we will immediately file a civil lawsuit. With the evidence you have here," she pointed to the papers, "we don't just have a chance of winning. We will win. Overwhelmingly." Leaving Grace's office, for the first time in a long time, Chloe and I felt the air seem lighter. We had our sword. Now we needed a lever. That afternoon, I made a call I had been hesitating about for 2 days. The call to Mr. Harrison, Walter's former business partner. I briefly explained that I was Walter's former daughter-in-law and had a sensitive matter to discuss. To my surprise, he agreed to meet me. We met at a small, quiet coffee shop. Mr. Harrison was an older man with silver hair and a sad face, etched with the deep wrinkles of experience. At first, he was very cautious, but as I told Chloe's story about the cancer lie, about the stolen inheritance, I saw a change in his eyes. The caution disappeared, replaced by a weary empathy. "Sounds familiar," he said, his voice hoarse. Walter was always a fox in sheep's clothing. He always knew how to find someone's weakness and attack it. For me, it was trust in a long-standing friendship. He convinced me to invest in a real estate project, then used sophisticated legal maneuvers to push me out of the contract and take all the profits. He shook his head. I lost a lot of money, but I lost more than that. My faith in people. I didn't sue because I was too tired and had no clear proof at the time. "This time is different," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "We have proof. And what we need from you isn't money. We need your story. We need you, if necessary, to be willing to testify about Walter's pattern of fraudulent behavior." Mr. Harrison looked out the window, lost in thought for a long moment. Then he turned back, and I saw a fire had been reignited in his tired eyes. "That girl, your niece," he said. "She doesn't deserve this. Walter has gotten away with it too many times." He leaned forward. "I'm not just willing to testify. I've kept everything. All the emails, the draft contracts, the notes from our conversations. I've kept them for years, not knowing for what. Maybe for a day like today." On the drive home, a powerful feeling rose within me. We were no longer alone in this fight. We had Grace Tanaka, the sharp sword of the law. And now we had Mr. Harrison, the keeper of Walter's past secrets. A lever that could create unimaginable pressure. Now we have everything we need. I said to Chloe. She nodded, her eyes resolute. It's time to send them the first letter. Grace Tanaka's demand letter was not a plea. It was a 3-page legal document, cold, precise, and devoid of emotion. It laid out the entire sequence of events in detail, from the cancer phone call, the $85 transfer, to the evidence from the real estate blog. The final section made a clear demand: the return of the full principal amount, plus the 10% statutory interest as stipulated by Washington state law for non-contractual debts, and all incurred attorney's fees. They had 10 business days to comply. Otherwise, a lawsuit would be filed in King County Superior Court on the 11th business day. We didn't send it via regular mail. Grace hired a professional process server. A man in a uniform would hand-deliver the letter to Walter or Helen and require a signature upon receipt. The message was clear. This wasn't a letter from your former daughter-in-law. This was a message from a law firm. The letter was delivered on a Tuesday morning. The storm hit just 3 hours later. My phone rang, the screen displaying Walter. I took a deep breath, signaled to Chloe that the battle had begun, and answered the call. "What the hell is this?" His scream erupted from the other end, full of anger and arrogance. "What do you think you're doing, Sarah? Sending a threatening letter to your own parents' home?" "That wasn't a threat, Walter," I replied, my voice frighteningly calm. "It was a legal document. It outlines the consequences for your and Helen's fraudulent actions." "Fraud? You dare call us fraudsters? Chloe gave us the money voluntarily. You're not getting a single cent. Do you hear me? Not 1 cent." "You have 10 days, Walter," I repeated as if I were talking to a child throwing a tantrum. "If the full amount has not been transferred to our lawyer's account after 10 days, then you'll have the chance to explain that voluntary story to a judge. Good luck." I hung up before he could scream another word. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time it was Helen. Her approach was completely different. "Sarah? Oh, Sarah." Her voice sobbing, full of fake anguish. "How could you do this to us? To your own family? We loved Chloe so much. You're destroying everything. You're tearing this family apart." "The only ones destroying this family are you and Walter," I replied without a flicker of hesitation. "When you decided to invent a cancer story to swindle your granddaughter out of her college money. It was just a misunderstanding." She wailed. "We always intended to help Chloe. You're turning her into an ungrateful person. You're turning against your own parents. I am protecting my daughter from the people who took advantage of her," I said, and hung up on her too. I had no time for crocodile tears. But the storm wasn't over. The third call came from Brenda. Her voice was shrill and self-righteous. "What the hell are you doing, Sarah? Do you have any idea how much trouble you're causing? Mom and Dad are devastated. You're trying to ruin Haley's graduation." "Brenda, this has nothing to do with Haley." I tried to explain warily. "Nothing to do with her? Everything has to do with her. You're jealous of my family's success, so you're making up this story to demand money. You're willing to cause all this drama for a little bit of money?" "A little bit of money, Brenda?" I asked, my patience gone. $85,000, my daughter's entire future, my mother's entire legacy, and you call that a little bit of money? I didn't wait for her to answer. I ended the third call in under an hour. I threw the phone onto the sofa and looked at Chloe. She had heard everything. Her hands were cold and she was trembling, but there was no fear in her eyes. It was a profound disappointment. "They didn't even try to apologize, Mom," she said quietly. "They don't feel guilty at all. They're just angry they got caught." I went to her side, putting my arms around her thin shoulders. "I know, sweetie, and that's why we can't back down." "I'm not scared," Chloe said, looking up at me, and I saw a phenomenal strength in her eyes. Hearing what they said just makes me more certain we're doing the right thing. They need to learn they can't treat people like this. The storm of phone calls had shown us their true faces: Walter's arrogance, Helen's manipulation, and Brenda's selfishness. It didn't make us flinch. On the contrary, it strengthened our resolve. The war was no longer a secret. It was out in the open, and we were ready for whatever came next. When direct threats didn't work, Walter and Helen began to wield the weapon they had honed for decades: their social network and the art of twisting the truth. They stopped calling me. Instead, the calls started coming from other people. First was Mrs. Patty, a friend from Helen's garden club. Her voice was full of feigned sympathy. "Sarah, dear, I just spoke with Helen. She was crying so hard. I know sometimes families have disagreements over money, but we shouldn't let it destroy our relationships. She loves her grandchildren so much." I responded politely but firmly, "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Patty. But this story is not just about money. There is a lot you haven't been told." Next was a text from a distant relative I hadn't spoken to in years. "Heard you're suing your former in-laws. That's terrible. Walter and Helen have always been the most generous people I've ever known." And then there were the pitying glances, the whispers behind my back when I went to the supermarket or the pharmacy. I could feel it. They were painting a narrative in which I was the bitter, greedy ex-daughter-in-law, using her daughter to extort two poor, kind old grandparents. They were trying to isolate us, to turn us into the villains of our own tragedy. Every word, every look was like a small pinprick, but we did not back down. Chloe, surprisingly, was the stronger one. "They're doing this because they're scared, Mom," she said. "They know they were wrong, so they have to try to convince everyone else that we are the ones who are wrong." On the 7th day of the deadline, Helen called me again. This time, her voice was no longer crying or angry. It was sickeningly sweet, as if nothing had ever happened. "Sarah," she said, her voice gentle, "this weekend is Haley's graduation party. We've booked a place at the yacht club. I know there's some tension between us, but I really hope you and Chloe will come." I was silent, waiting for the trap. "Let's put everything aside, at least for one night, for Haley's sake," she continued. "She's not at fault in any of this. She would be so sad if her sister-in-law and her niece weren't there. Please come, so everyone can see we're still a family." "A family?" I almost laughed. "After everything you and Walter have done, you're still talking about family?" "I'm just trying to mend things, Sarah." "No, thank you. We won't be coming," I said firmly. I thought that was the end of it. But when I told Chloe, she looked at me with an expression I didn't expect. "Mom," she said slowly, "I think we should go." I was stunned. Go where? To do what? To let them continue their act and have their friends look at us with pity? "No," Chloe replied, and I heard an incredible maturity in her voice. "I don't want to hide anymore. I hid in my room and cried. I stayed silent when they called and yelled at us. I'm tired of letting them control the narrative." She looked straight at me, her eyes resolute. "I want to go there. I want to look them in the eye as they brag about their fake generosity. I want them to have to face my presence, the presence of the granddaughter they callously scammed. I need this, Mom, not to start a fight, but to end it on my own terms." I looked at my daughter and I understood. This was no longer just my fight. Chloe was no longer a victim who needed protecting. She had become a warrior, and she needed to go into battle. "All right, sweetie," I said. "We'll go." The night of the party, the atmosphere in our house was strange. We weren't getting ready for a celebration. We were putting on armor. Chloe chose a simple but elegant dress, one she had bought with her own part-time money long ago. She didn't look glamorous, but she exuded an air of dignity and self-respect. As we drove to the luxurious yacht club, seeing the glittering lights and the finely dressed guests, I took Chloe's hand. "Ready, my warrior?" She squeezed my hand. "I'm ready." We knew this wasn't a party. It was a stage. And tonight, we would no longer be supporting characters in their play. We would write the final act for ourselves. The yacht club was another world entirely. The air of fake luxury reeked of expensive perfume and fresh seafood. The clinking of wine glasses mingled with lively conversations and brittle, empty laughter. Everyone was dressed in their finest, wearing the facade of success and contentment. The moment we walked in, Helen spotted us. She rushed over, arms outstretched, and enveloped Chloe in a performative hug. "Oh, you're here! I'm so glad!" she exclaimed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. It was the perfect act of a benevolent grandmother trying to mend her family. Walter just stood at a distance, giving a stiff nod, his eyes flashing with an undisguisable annoyance. We were seated at a large round table, along with a few of the grandparents' close friends and Brenda's family. The atmosphere at the table was suffocating. Everyone tried to make pointless small talk, But there was a giant elephant in the room that no one dared to mention. Dinner was served, and the grandparents' performance continued. They endlessly praised Haley, her grades, her extracurriculars, her bright future at UCLA. And then, as I had anticipated, they began their subtle attacks on Chloe. Mrs. Patty, the friend from the garden club, turned to Chloe with a kind smile. "And what about you, dear Chloe? Have you decided which school you'll be attending?" Before Chloe could open her mouth, Helen quickly interjected, her voice sweet but full of insinuation. "Oh, our Chloe is taking a more practical path, Patty. She's considering community colleges. It's a very sensible and economical choice. Not everyone needs an expensive education to succeed, right?" I saw Chloe's hand, resting under the table, clench into a fist. She said nothing, just smiled politely full, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. This public humiliation, disguised as practical advice, hurt more than a slap. And then, the moment we had been waiting for arrived. After the main course, Walter stood up, a champagne flute in his hand, and tapped it lightly to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming with self-satisfaction. "Today, we are here to celebrate a major milestone in the life of my beloved granddaughter, Haley. To recognize her hard work and outstanding achievements, Helen and I decided to give her a special gift, an investment in her future, a real asset, a luxury apartment in Bellevue." Murmurs of oohs and ahs filled the room. People applauded. Haley blushed with delight. A guest at our table exclaimed, "Wow, Walter, you two are so generous. An apartment there must have cost a fortune." That was my cue. I set my fork down, making a small but audible clink. Then I spoke, my voice not loud, but clear and calm, loud enough for everyone at our table to hear. "It was very expensive, sir." All eyes turned to me, especially when it's paid for with another grandchild's entire college fund and inheritance. The room seemed to fall silent. The murmurs died. You could have heard a pin drop. Walter's face hardened, turning from a smug red to a pale white of anger and panic. "Sarah," he hissed. "This is neither the time nor the place." "Oh, really?" I raised an eyebrow. "Then when is the right time, Walter? Perhaps we should schedule a time to discuss your fabricated cancer story? Or should we wait until you've returned the $85,000 you scammed from Chloe?" Horror was plain on the faces of the guests. Mrs. Patty's jaw dropped. Brenda and her husband looked like they wanted the ground to swallow them whole. Haley, a look of complete confusion on her face, turned to her grandparents. "Cancer? Chloe's college money? Grandma, Grandpa, what's going on?" And that's when Chloe spoke. She didn't look at me or the guests. She looked directly at Walter and Helen, her eyes no longer holding fear, only a profound disappointment. "You told me you had cancer." Her voice rang out, clear and painful. "You told me you would die without the money. I believed you. I gave you everything I had, everything my grandmother left for me. Why?" That innocent but heavy question hung in the air. No one could answer it. Their play was over. I stood up, placing my napkin on the table. "We'll be leaving now." I glanced around the table, then looked directly at Walter and Helen, the two people frozen in their chairs. "You didn't just take money, you stole trust. And that's something no apartment, no amount of money can ever buy back." With that, Chloe and I turned and walked away. We walked through the stunned crowd, our heads held high. We didn't need to hear any more excuses or lies. We had spoken the truth. The stage was now theirs, and they would have to clean up the mess they had created. The air in the car on the way home was strangely silent. The adrenaline from the confrontation had subsided, leaving a tired emptiness. I glanced at Chloe. She was looking out the window, the streetlights sliding across her face, creating streaks of light and shadow. Then, in the quiet, her thin shoulders began to shake. She brought her hands to her face and began to cry, but this time her crying was very different. It wasn't the crying of heartbreak or despair anymore. It was the crying of release, of a terrible pressure finally being let go. "I did it, Mom," she said through her sobs. I told the truth. I put an arm around her shoulder, pulling her close. "You did more than that, sweetie. You were so brave. I am so incredibly proud of you." We sat like that for a long time after we got home, in the car still parked out front. Both of our phones started buzzing nonstop with calls and texts, but we ignored them. In that moment, we just needed each other. We had gone through the eye of the storm together, and we had come out on the other side, more scarred but unbroken. The following days were a clear testament to the saying, "News travels fast." The bombshell we had dropped at the yacht club sent a shockwave through Walter and Helen's social circle. But the first call I received the next morning came from the most unexpected person, Haley. Her voice on the other end was frantic and distraught. "Aunt Sarah, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know anything, I swear." She told me that right after we left, the party fell apart in a cloud of awkwardness and whispers. Haley had confronted her parents and grandparents. They told me it was their savings. Haley cried into the phone. "I can't believe they would do that to Chloe. I feel sick standing on the balcony of that apartment. It's not mine, it's her dream." She said she had demanded her parents sell the apartment immediately to pay Chloe back. But of course, Walter and Helen refused, saying it was a grown-up matter. Even so, hearing the sincerity and remorse in Haley's voice, I knew there was at least a glimmer of hope for the next generation of this family. On the 9th day of the 10-day deadline, as we were preparing for the next step of officially filing the lawsuit, I got a call from our lawyer, Grace Tanaka. "They've blinked, Sarah." Grace's voice came through, a note of undisguised satisfaction in it. "Their lawyer just called me. They want to negotiate." "Negotiate?" I asked. "Yes. They're offering to return the principal amount of $85,000, but they want us to drop the demand for interest and attorney's fees in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement." "What was your answer?" "I told him his offer was laughable," Grace replied decisively. "I made it clear our terms were final and non-negotiable. Either full payment or we see them in court." And then, Grace paused for dramatic effect. I casually mentioned that we had a very credible witness, a Mr. Harrison, who was very willing to testify about some of Mr. Walter's interesting business activities from the past. That was the kill shot. Walter wasn't afraid of losing face with his family. He was afraid of losing face with people more powerful, and especially afraid of the IRS. The prospect of his shady business past being aired in open court was far more terrifying than losing the money. Less than an hour later, Grace called back. Her voice was brief this time. "It's done. They've agreed to all terms. They are sending a cashier's check to my office tomorrow morning. The full amount." When I told Chloe the news, she just nodded quietly. There was no cheer of joy, no smile of victory. We sat side by side in the living room, looking out the window as the June rain began to fall. "I thought that when we got the money back," Chloe said softly, "I would feel so happy, so triumphant. But I just feel empty." I put my arm around her. "I know, sweetie, because the thing we really wanted back wasn't the money. We wanted the trust back. We wanted back the years we believed in them unconditionally. And that's something that can never be returned." The check arrived as promised. The financial battle was over. We had won, but it wasn't a victory that brought happiness. It was a victory that brought justice. And sometimes, in life, justice is the only and the final thing we can demand. Thank you for listening.